The last time I was speaking with Richard Burton, he talked about the early time in his life when he realized that he was somehow destined to act, but didn't realize, and still doesn't today, exactly what it is, or what the power is, or the gift, or the charisma, or whatever that people pointed out to him that he had at a very early age. He certainly hasn't lost any of it, and it has grown with the years, and I'm glad that he's growing old with us here nightly, it seems, and sharing with us a lot of wonderful information about himself and his life. If you'll welcome again, just to make him feel at home, Richard Burton. Well, let's get to the thing that I really want to know about. What does Garbo's knee feel like?
Absolutely marvelous.
Somehow I expected that. Is anyone in the dark about what we're talking about?
How did you know about that?
What am I talking about, and have I spoiled the punchline of a...
No, not a bit.
An anecdote, I wonder.
No, you must have read somewhere that I went to a party in Hollywood, is that right?
Yes? Something.
Years ago, I went to a party in Hollywood, and it was, there were about 20 people there. And there was this lady, sort of 40 years old, I thought, perhaps, which seemed to me then to be like 100, because I was only about 25 or 6 or something. And, but I found it absolutely fascinating. And I told her some, what I thought were funny stories, and she thought were funny too. And she told me some. And they were, to my surprise, because she looked so very much like a lady. They were faintly, slightly blue. Wow. And I remember at one point sort of doing that to her. So anyway, I then went to my wife, Sybil, and I said, I've just met the most fascinating woman. I said, that lady over there. She said, that is Greta Garbo. I said, oh my God. I'd never seen her, you see, I'd never seen her in my life.
You mean you looked at that face and did not... Where did you grow up, in a mine?
Yeah.
I can't believe...
I'd never seen her in my life.
Not seen the Garbo face on the screen. Yeah. One of the few people who saw it in life first.
Yes. So that the force that she has on the screen is real in real life, because there was something incredibly attractive about the woman. Because why did I pick her out of this party? She wasn't my age or anything like that. She
has it.
Quietly blazed, if there's such a paradox as possible.
Does that mean that to this day you have never seen Camille or Queen Christina? Or...
Oh yes, I've seen her since. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think she is marvelous, especially as a comedian.
You do something that I've tried several times and found impossible. Well, there might be any number of things, but and that is to keep a diary. What is the secret of that? I found it impossibly hard, the discipline for one thing, and also to not look back and find that the fact that I got up at a certain time and that it rained today is not very interesting years later.
No, indeed, they're virtually unreadable, I think, most of it. I have occasionally had a glance back, but in actual fact, I haven't, or only very sporadically, written the diary for the last 3 or 4 years. And I said to a great friend of mine, he said, how's the journal? Because occasionally I take bits from the journal and elaborate on them, and they get published. You know, Ladies' Home Journal or Vogue magazine, or the people who pay the most money. And
well,
Cosmopolitan stuff. But very rarely. I've only published about 10 pieces in my life. But I said, why? I said to this man whose name is David, I said, why, David, do you think that the impulse to write has temporarily, I hope, just died? And he said, it's perfectly obvious. You're too happy. I thought, but I've been happy before, and I kept on writing, and I still can't work it out. Anyway, it does continue occasionally.
You apparently are a born writer. I read a couple of those pieces. One you wrote about rugby. I won't make you tell that whole story that you've done in interviews, and at least in the one I read in the paper. But you seem to be a writer.
Well, I think, yes, I think I've always admired writers more than any other craftsman. I don't know many painters. I know a couple, I suppose. I find them inarticulate. And actors generally are raconteurs. They very rarely talk about. They tell endless stories, which I'm being guilty of on this program. But I'm capable, actually, of a normal conversation, I hope. But I find the company of writers to be highly stimulating. Very few of them, of course, are articulate in the actor's sense of the word, with the exception of Brendan Behan and Dylan Thomas, both of whom I knew quite well, who were marvelous talkers. They're generally very taciturn.
Often very disappointing. You think this can't be the person who turned out this wonderful
Yes, and there's
prose.
one thing I must say that I always find rather disconcerting. I wish novelists would not put their pictures on the back of books, because you read a book which is perhaps absolutely fascinating, and it's, shall we say, one of these espionage books or something like that, and you read the book and you're absolutely gripped by it. And then there's a picture of the chap on the back, and he's a febrile old man, bald as a banana, about 75 years old, and you know that it's all kind of wishful thinking on his part. He's pretending to be James Bond. Very few faces match up to the writing. I mean, Ian Fleming's dead. Ian Fleming could very easily have been James Bond, but
could he?
Very few. I mean, in looks.
In looks.
But very few really stand up to their photographs, if you know what I mean.
That is interesting. Yes, and you form a picture of the author as you read always.
Yes.
I heard that Ian Fleming was a dreadful man.
I never met him, so I know nothing
Just
about
an awful man. I forget who wrote that about him. A long piece about Ian Fleming and how it was no accident that the villains were always Jewish or had Jewish overtones, and that he was a bigoted, anti-Semitic, rotten little man.
Yes. I
hope he isn't watching.
He is
from anywhere.
Up there, or down
well,
there.
yeah, I hope he is. If he's, where would he be watching from if he's all those things? In Hollywood, you also knew Bogey, as those of us who never met him always call him. And he's one of a handful of people that I'm really terribly sorry I never met. Should I be sorry?
Oh yes, you missed a great personality, I think. Yeah. I was deeply fond of him. He swelled a very, very thin company of people that I know who were absolutely dead on at pricking the bubble of pomposity in other people. He was absolutely extraordinary. He went straight for the weakness in the pompous.
Seen this thing?
Oh, I've seen it work with him so many times. Yeah. Sometimes, I remember there was a lawyer in Hollywood who was very much a ladies' man, with a great mouthful of teeth, very handsome, and always very tanned, and beautiful hair and everything. And he escorted all the between marriages stars everywhere. And Bogey and I went to this party. I called him Humphrey. I did too.
I will too from now on.
Yes. No, I make it a point that if I really love somebody or respect somebody, I call them by their full names.
It is a kind of affectionate way. Yeah.
Yeah, so I called him Humphrey, as I call you Dick, of course.
Richard being my full.
Is Richard actually your name?
Mm-hmm.
Ah, then I shall call you Richard.
Okay.
But so he said there was a dance. They put up a marquee tent and all that. And so Bogey and I just sat, as we are sitting indeed, And this fella was dancing with various ladies and obviously chatting them up, as they say in England. And Bogey said, I'm the only man in the world who cannot do an impersonation of Bogey. Bogey said, let's just stare at him, the two of us. Okay. So that's all we did. There were those awful, baleful eyes of Bogey, and he's drinking, what was he drinking? Brandy and Benedictine, I can remember, and he's sipping away. And neither of us took our eyes off this guy. And he danced around the floor, and we never, wherever he went, just looked at him. And finally, you could see the fella fall apart. And he left and went and sat quietly in the corner.
I wonder why he felt the need to do that. Bogart.
He just picked out that man and realized, what sort of chap he was.
They knew just what would throw him.
Yes. Yeah. And he was totally unflappable. What's the American for unflappable? I mean,
unflappable is what we've learned to say.
Couldn't faze him, as they say. Yeah. Because once I went to a party at the Bogart's house, and Humphrey was in Africa, I think, making a film with John Huston. I think The African Queen, but I'm not entirely certain. I think it may have been that film they made in Sicily or southern Italy, but with Peter Lorre and all that. But whatever it was, he wasn't there.
Beat the Devil, maybe.
Beat the Devil, it might have been.
Yeah.
And I had dinner with Betty Bogart, as she was then known, Betty Bacall, Lauren Bacall, and my wife, Sybil, and Emlyn Williams, the Welsh actor and playwright and wit, and perhaps 20 other people. And I became absolutely paralyzed with drink, absolutely fractured. And I finally passed out, and they put me on a settee and abandoned me. So Emlyn went home with Sybil, and I was left. The party finally disintegrated, and I left there, and I woke in the morning. And I never suffered from hangovers. I had my first hangover when I was 45. I'd never had a hangover in my life, so I felt perfectly all right. But standing there was one of the biggest gossips in Hollywood. And there I was at, shall we say, 9:30 in the morning, Bogey being in Sicily or Africa, Betty being upstairs, and there I was. What was I doing there? Right. So naturally the word spread round from this lady, and the columns picked it up, and I said, you better write. When I heard about it, I said to Lauren Bacall, you better write to Bogey and explain, that I did it again or something like that. No, don't say that, I said. So anyway, dissolved, as they say in the business, and I was in London, and Humphrey Bogart had come back from wherever he was, and they were all staying at the Dorchester, and Lauren Bacall was there as well, and John Huston was directing the picture. And so I went to meet Bogey, and Lauren Bacall, who can be very wicked, said, get into his pajamas. So she got his pajamas out, and I got into Bogey's pajamas, and I was sitting there, as I am here, drinking a scotch on the rocks, and Bogey came home from work, and he passed me, he said, hi, kid. Went into the next room. I felt such a fool. He hadn't said anything about it. Then in came Huston, and I'd never met Huston. And he came shambling in, like a strange bear walk he has. And Betty said, this is Richard Burton, and it's John Huston. And he said, hi, Dick. And I said, don't call me Dick, please. Call me Richard. He said, sure, Dick. And he's called me Dick ever since. And he also sat down and buried himself in the Paris Tribune or something, and was drinking. Bogey came back in and had a joke has never fallen flatter in all its life. And finally I had to say, Bogey, I'm wearing your pajamas. He said, oh, so you are, kid, take them off.